Okay, good afternoon and welcome, or good morning, depending on where you are. My name is Casey Murphy, and I'm ACT's Director of Programs and Events. I want to thank you for joining us today for ACT's last webinar of the year, believe it or not, entitled New Year, New Transportation Possibilities, sponsored today by our friends at WeDriveU. Just want to give a quick reminder to all of you to tweet us during the webinar at using the ACT National uh, uh, toolbar and the hashtag ActWebinar. Before we hear from our presenters this afternoon, I wanted to quickly take care of a few housekeeping items. First, all attendees are on mute during this webinar. If you have a question or have a problem hearing us, please type it in the chat box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. We will do our best to answer all of your questions as we get going. Second, we will be hosting a Q&A at the end of the webinar, but please feel free to type in your questions as we go along. Please note when typing in your question, please put in the name of the person that the question is geared towards. And then finally, this session is being recorded. We'll have the recording up on the ACT website within 24 hours. Now I'd like to pass things over to David Strauss, ACT's Executive Director, to give an update on what ACT is currently working on. David?
Well, thank you, Casey. Many thanks to all of you that are joining us today for our final webinar of 2020. This year's webinar series featured 16 informative sessions on a diverse range of TDM topics, including branding, communications, blockchains, potential for transportation, biking to work, and of course, many webinars on addressing the impacts of COVID. Hundreds of members participated in one or even all of our webinars over the past year, which have become our most highly rated value of membership, understandable since we've been unable to gather in person this year. I want to thank Casey Murphy for all of her work in leading the development of our webinar series and to the many organizations that have sponsored them. If you have ideas for future webinars, please be sure to complete the webinar proposal form on our website. And don't forget, as members, you have access to the entire webinar archive online. We do have a few individuals joining us today that are not yet members of ACT. To each of you, let me say thank you for joining us. I invite you to become a member of the association and to join our community of TDM professionals. I guarantee you that ACT membership will be a valued investment in your professional growth. Before we get started, I want to take a moment to update everyone on some of the activities and news from ACT. Session proposals for ACT's International Conference are due on December 23rd. The International Conference is scheduled to take place in person at Disney World in August 2021. This will hopefully be our first major in-person event since 2019. So I encourage all members to think about the great work they're doing and to consider pulling a session together. I know for a fact that there are a ton of great programs, initiatives, and other efforts that would be worthy additions to our conference program. The Tdmcp exam window is closing December 18th, but you're still able to register and take the exam before Friday and receive the $200 discount special intro rate that we're offering for the inaugural exam window. Congratulations goes out to all the individuals that have recently passed the exam, and best of luck to the 25 members that are currently scheduled to take the exam this week. Our next exam window will be scheduled for late spring, early summer 2021, and the exact dates will be shared in the future. Last week, ACT had the honor of hosting Representative Chuy Garcia, Democrat from Illinois, for a member policy briefing. As a member of the House T&I Committee and co-chair of the Future of Transportation Caucus, the representative provided ACT an update on the goals for the next Congress and the new administration, and expressed strong support for ACT's efforts to expand federal support of TDM. ACT's Public Policy Committee also met last week to begin the process of reviewing our More Through TDM Act, which will need to be reintroduced in the 117th Congress. In the coming months, there will be many opportunities for members to engage in our effort to build support and co-sponsorship of this legislation. And yesterday, ACT sent out an end-of-year membership survey to all members. Your feedback is greatly appreciated and extremely important to us. And I hope that you'll take a few minutes to let us know about your recent experiences in the organization. And lastly, a final reminder that statements of interest to serve on ACT's newly approved Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Task Force Committee are due this Friday, December 18th, and you can get a link to the nominations form on our website. Now on to today's webinar, New Year, New Transportation Possibilities, sponsored by WeDriveU. Today we'll hear from our speakers from Wells & Associates, Tesla, and WeDriveU about TDM trends for 2021 and how the return to work campus is working and other great mobility success tips. It's my pleasure to introduce our speakers. First, we have Melvin Justice, the Senior Transportation Project Manager at Tesla, where he leads their TDM and commuter benefits program. As a Senior Transportation Project Manager, he oversees all TDM modes, bike, carpool, vanpool, fiscal oversight and enrollment of commuter benefits, along with multiple core transportation initiatives to enroll employees in sustainable and alternative transportation. With a substantial background in commuter shuttle programs, Melvin utilizes innovation and proven processes to provide continuous efficiencies and adoption within TDM as a whole. We'll also be joined by Justin Schor, who is a principal with Wells & Associates and brings over 20 years of forward-thinking mobility management experience in communities across the United States. His skills span planning and implementing award-winning transportation solutions for real estate developments. He combines marketing experience with extensive transportation planning skills to confidently develop mobility strategies that are grounded in reality with measurable results. Should also add that he was a lead author on the book Building a Multimodal Future, an important read for individuals looking to take the Tdmcp exam. And now to kick us off, we will have Shawn Kelly, who is Managing Director for Customer Success at WeDriveU. In this role, he optimizes the customer experience and creates value throughout the journey, from onboarding and implementation to account growth and retention. Shawn joined WeDriveU in 2015 and has managed client programs in Boston, Austin, and Chicago. Shawn was recognized by ACT last month as one of our 40 under 40 in TDM for 2020. Shawn, the platform is yours.
Thanks, David. Right, so we'll actually kick things off with the top trend on everyone's minds. So returning to offices and campuses. This is actually a three-part trend with three distinct themes for return to office and campus. So breaking the rules a little bit, but that's all right. And we're actually going to start with a poll to see what everyone on this webinar's current plans are. So whether you're a TMA, consulting firm, supplier, select a choice based on where returns are concentrated. So Q1 through Q4, no set date, or already back.
We'll just give it about another 10 seconds or so here, Shawn.
Sure. I think Melvin was going to give us the Jeopardy music. No.
All right. All right, just share the results with you.
Awesome. So let's see. So yeah, I mean, it's not super surprising. So Q1, we have 6%. So I think we've made it this long. So I don't think organizations are really wanting to, rush our employees back before it makes sense. So I think it's pretty safe to assume these decisions align with, state specific plans for vaccine distribution. 9% in Q2, 17% in Q3, 52% with no set date. And we do have 1% in Q4. So for those of you holding out until Q4, probably gonna have to drag your employees back to the office after being accustomed to working from home for so long. So thanks, Casey, for putting that up there. In planning for the webinar, we were really struck by the massive opportunity for our community to take what we've learned from the pandemic and head into the new year with a new outlook. I mean, things like eliminating fear, changing behavior, making it fun, comfortable, and safe heading into 2021. So at least on our end, we believe that our most successful programs in 2021 will be grounded in flexibility. So we've had to learn a lot with all of our programs on how to effectively scale up and down and still be sustainable long-term with our customers. So depending on the needs, I mean, we anticipate this trend to continue well into 2021. I know in a little bit, Justin will talk about how this flexibility will impact office environments and workplace experience. And then I'll let Melvin talk about some of his current and potential alternatives.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn, and welcome everybody again to this ACT seminar. Appreciate the panelists and everyone joining here. As we look and walk through this first really silo of understanding the flexible commute options, there's many avenues of interest, right? There's outfits that are going to be coming back, like universities, right? They're pressing students to come back to room and board. Some private outfits that are saying, hey, we have real estate interest and we want you to come back. And then those that are saying, hey, we see this working, right? And we see this being a viable option. And so there's going to be many avenues of opportunity. And one of the things that I could say, at least from the standpoint of Tesla and in general, just being an avid commuter, from the public standpoint, is what works for you may, at this current juncture, may be what works for you long term. As things change and evolve, understanding what is possible is going to be the key factor. I think as employers from a private standpoint look and say, well, what's going to be the safest and most economical option, right, to get back to work for folks? What's going to be in the best interest of our employees to get them back safely, but then also make them feel confident? So everyone has a mode out there, right? Bike, van, pool, whatever you call it, but education and I think really enrollment, right? From the executive stakeholders, we're going to talk about this, but getting those folks to buy in is going to be the big one, right? And so we'll talk about it, but a lot of the flexible commute options at this current time, they're there, right? There's a lot of multimodal use that we had before is still available. How can we re-enroll and re-educate for our current employees and those that are coming on, right? We're still hiring, right? People are still looking to bring people on. So how do we get them involved? We'll talk about more about that as we walk through this. I just wanted to throw that out there to get us level set as we move through this program.
Yeah, great point. And we can move on to the next slide. One of the things that we talked about all year long is communication and over communicating. And it's not just communication through the transportation team or directly to your employees. It's really how are you handling cross-functional communication throughout the organization. So I'll actually hand it back to Melvin to talk about how he's handling this in his day-to-day.
Thanks, Shawn. I won't I know there's a lot of Melvin time right now. We're going to reduce that down a little bit as we got other folks here. But one of the things in regards to this particular avenue of cross-functional transportation task forces, what does that really mean, right? Are we looking at stakeholders within an organization? It could be, security, it could be IT staff, it could be legal, it could be procurement and finance, right? From a private perspective, it could be the general citizen, tax holders, right? And it could be the overall individual that's looking to take these systems on as a general person in the US, right? Or wherever you live. Who's involved, right? Who's going to make what possible in order to make these avenues of interest available, right? Is it taxpayer money? Is it initiatives? Is it sign-offs, internally from a private perspective, specific to where I am at Tesla directly, right? It's a combination of, I look at this as a lot of people watch The Simpsons. It's getting that village together, right? Mayor Quimby's of the world, right? And getting all the core village players, I like to call it, aligned and calibrated in order to see the overall vision, to see what's possible. And then what I do is I technically pilot that. I pilot that with really no money. And why? It's not because Tesla's providing it. It's because I look at innovative ways and saying, what can I do to allow folks to not only pre-wire them to enroll in an opportunity for employees to succeed, but how is it going to be beneficial for the overall goal of having people give their best, right? And be the best version of themselves. So if it's biking, which is a craze right now, that's a great way to lean, right? The numbers speak for itself. I don't need, as a transportation person, it's hard. It was hard a year ago to say, hey, biking's great. And this is the reason, these are the reasons why. Now you're seeing all these different, the VPs and everyone really signing up and saying, hey, I want to know what we can do, because now it affects everyone, and we can see it truly being a focal and core effect, it being transportation. And so the folks that maybe you would have a hard time talking with in general about programs, it could be folks that are facilities members or folks that may not be transportation laden, understanding and enrolling those audiences now has been a lot easier than before. So for me specifically, I've been able to understand how to break those silos down. And it's because of the fact that I've listened to those audiences. Now they're coming to the table saying, we want to learn, we want to be enrolled, because we understand how important it is. Just me, myself, not even someone that works here, just me, myself out on the periphery. How am I going to get over to the grocery store today, right? How am I going to be able to, manage the daily ins and outs of paying my bills and things like that? I don't have a car, or I don't have the means. So it's circumference is not only just work, but also real life. And this is where a lot of that grounding happens in a lot of those, for those stakeholders. So the task forces that we're starting to see are folks that truly may not have been directly involved, maybe indirectly involved, but now they're coming to the table because of the unilateral effect of not only COVID, but because of the actual effect of COVID and the different things that have spiraled around it. So that's primarily the thing that is important here, is understanding the players, but really understanding how we can enroll and adopt, right? Re-educate current staff, and then having those new folks that are coming in also reinvigorate some of those different things that are out there that we see that are positive, in order for us to now break down and minimize the barriers, whether it be mental or physical in this case, to have the general whole, which is us, succeed.
Do you have any tips for maybe a smaller company to, how do they kind of take that feedback and put something like that in place?
Yeah, so one of the key things I would say, if you're small, let's say you have a group of 9 people, or you're a group of 90 or 900, whatever that number is, it's the same idea, but really at a lower scale, meaning that you can say, hey, you know what, we need to align, and these are the things that are important for our audience. This is important to us, and this is the ways we can help support that importance. We tier it out. We look at levels of priority importance, and we understand our folks are coming from here. These are the things that matter to them, and this is why it matters, and this is the way we're going to be able to take a small step towards the bigger goal, right? So really doesn't require a lot of numbers. It actually is better if you have smaller numbers. To be quite fair, it's actually better if you are smaller, because you have a more intimate and aligned engagement versus the bigger companies. More importantly, those that are there that are smaller have seen each other on multiple levels already. There's been cross-referencing and cross-tracks amongst other subjects, right, that come into play. So the intimacy is already built. It's a matter of understanding how maybe transportation wasn't a huge item, maybe it was, but understanding how it affects, or what the pivotal points are within those conversations of intimacy within those smaller companies, how they can translate and make it impactful from a overall level. So it might have been third tier or third priority, right? A P4 item, as we like to call it. Maybe it's P1 now, or maybe it's P4 in their mind, but it is a P1 overall. How do we bridge that gap? Well, that intimacy with the smaller company helps that already. Less people equal less opportunity of gaps when it comes to mindset and enrollment.
Absolutely. All right, so our next trend, if we want to go to the next one. So if you're like me, you're currently in your kitchen or have another makeshift office in your house somewhere. So we'll close out our #1 trend of return to office campus with the last theme of balancing telework and transportation. Justin, I know you had some interesting data and perspective on this one.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. I mean, I think like you, Shawn, I'm sitting in my guest bedroom here. And if you know, all of us in the industry a year ago would have been grateful for the percentage of telework that we're experiencing now in terms of achieving our TDM goals. But now we're facing this issue where that has a potential to have some backlash on us. Obviously, people are no longer taking transit as much. There's concern that that may have a negative impact on using other forms of TDM that we traditionally promote in the industry. So one of the things that we'll talk about in a little bit that we are seeing from some national research we did with Newmark Knight Frank, now Newmark, is that the experience of what property managers in the office sector who are managing multi-tenant properties expect to happen. Well, when we did the survey, we were thinking it would be the end of this year, we'd all be back to work, but the same results apply, is very different, whether you're in an urban space, a suburban space, or an exurban space. So we thought we'd do a quick poll just to get a feel from this audience about where all of us fit in each of those categories so that we can direct some of the conversation to place some emphasis on those specific markets.
Thank you, Justin. Yeah, we're going to give it here about another 10 more seconds here. We got majority of the folks voted in here. Give it a few more here as it starts to spike up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and we'll close it out here and share the results.
Fantastic. Thanks, Casey. So we've got about 21% of the folks are in urban walkable areas. The largest number, 43%, are in suburban, somewhat walkable, and 36% in what we would call either exurban or car dependent. And you may recognize those categories on the right side are typical walk score categories that you would see when you plug in an address into the walk score website. So this is great. I think, Shawn, I don't know if you had closing thoughts on this before we moved on to the next slide, but that kind of gives us a good feel. The majority of folks are in suburban contexts, which are having a much different experience than what we are seeing in urban areas. And we'll talk about that in a little bit.
We can move on to the next slide.
So I guess about 4 or 5 months ago, we teamed up with Newmark Knight Frank, which many of you may know is a large office property manager, and we surveyed 300 properties in their portfolio across the country. And what we wanted to get a better feel for is, what are they going to do? What are they expecting to be their pain points as it relates to transportation and mobility in the future? And you'll see this slide is falling into the category of our car dependent folks. So the 36% of you that indicated you're exurban, and really some of our suburban folks too probably fit into this category, are concerned about telework for sure. Of the categories that were presented, teleworking came in at 38%. And the next closest thing that was a concern to property managers is increased parking demand. There was also some concern about decreased accessibility from transit and some increased demand for biking related infrastructure. People concerned that their storage facilities may not be able to handle the increase. But what I think is interesting is not just what you're seeing here. I mean, I'm sure if you can imagine, if you're a property manager, they make a living on ensuring that people are coming to their building. And if a significant portion of their people are no longer coming to their building, they're kind of struggling at best and maybe out of business at worst. So this is what the concerns were in suburban areas. On the next slide, we talk about contrasting it a little bit with the urban area. So before we talked about 38% being concerned about telework in suburban areas. In urban areas, it's nearly double at 61%. And obviously transit is a much bigger concern in urban areas. Increased parking demand. I mean, these properties were built with less parking ratios, with the understanding that majority of their employees and tenants and employees are going to take transit to work. And then a much larger, like 3 times higher concern about increased demand for bicycle related infrastructure. So the experience for the urban property, this is what they're anticipating, is a lot more dire than what we're expecting in the suburban areas. And that leads to a different way to be pitching TDM, which we'll talk about in later in the presentation, is a different angle than what we were used to talking about in the industry before. So with that, Shawn, I think I'm going to turn it back to you to kind of take us on to sustainability.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's see. And so one of the hot topics at the ACT National Conference was electrifying your commuter fleet. So we were frankly blown away with the interest that came from that session. So our number 2 trend here is sustainable mobility. We're hearing from a lot of partners that this will be a big year for electric vehicles. So some are taking advantage of downtime to transition fleets, that being a major priority while we're planning and thinking about our service resumption strategy for every one of our partners. We have some companies that are leading the way. So many of you recall AJ from Genentech talking about their commuter program during this year's ACT conference. His comment was one of our favorite takeaways, and I think it's really relevant here. He said, going electric is doable. So that's my take home point. You can do this. It's getting easier and easier. And really that's super true. So there's more charging options. There's more vehicle options. There's more resources than ever to make it happen. So I think the other point we're trying to make is it also doesn't have to happen all at once. So we don't have to do everything all at once. So one trend we're looking at in 2021 is really taking our existing assets and buses that are running otherwise in good condition and electrifying them. It's not necessarily a new thing. Companies have been doing that for quite a while, but this is kind of the perfect opportunity while we have some downtime or reduced service for people and companies, properties, universities to dip their toes into electric vehicles. So it gives you the chance to pilot something with, in a certain operating environment before investing in like major infrastructure. So that's something we're excited about in 2021. I know Wells and Associates does a lot of work on the property side, and actually opened my eyes up to a compelling bonus to sustainable fleets. Justin, you wanna?
Yeah, Shawn. I mean, I think a lot of us have been aware of LEED and LEED points as it relates to TDM for a long time, but more recently, LEED version 4.1 came out with a significant focus on LEED cities and communities. And, that would be the kind of thing you would see for like an improvement district, like an entire area trying to get certified for its sustainability. And within that, there's significant points for transportation. You get 6 credits out of the overall requirement for transportation, but 2 of those can be for alternative fuel vehicles. And that can be everything from charging stations to what you were just talking about with vehicles. But even just having shuttles, private shuttles that are made available to everybody in the public can get you 1 credit. So definitely what we're seeing moving forward is that areas that are, downtowns or business districts that are trying to comply with, green policies are looking toward ways they can do electric shuttles and shuttles in general. And I know Melvin has some other elements on the sustainability he wanted to add.
Oh yeah, so that's awesome stuff, right? We're talking about property. What are they doing to be part of the electric revolution, right? We're looking at shuttles, right? We talked about that. What about van pools, right? What about the common rider, right? We're looking at carpools even. I know a carpool may not be something people think about. It'll be back because there's vehicle credits right now for energy. So everyone I think that I've talked to and that I know, they're moving to this. If you look at sales in general, people are buying electric. People are moving to electric. They're moving to solar. Why? Because there are energy credits that benefit not only the taxpayer, but also the companies that supply this and or the individual if you're not even in a company. So the mobility across electric bikes, which sales are sky high, right? You're looking at van pool, looking to make that move, right? Carpool, right? Electric van pool, electric carpool. You want to talk about 2021? That's the next move. That's what's going to happen next. So you're wondering, I'm at work right now. Let me show you guys. I'm here. I'm in the house, right? So bottom line is these are the things that are allowing people to get back to work. They're saying, what can I do that's sustainable, that I'm a part of? What can I do that can help the environment? How can I feel safe? These options, sustainable mobility, just in general, whether it be you saying, hey, I'm going to self-power walk, right? Or I am going to take an electric scooter, or you know what, I want to use this, another electric apparatus is a part of that. And now the government next year especially be very focused, but they're going to be providing a lot more credits than what we've seen historically in the last, I would say, 10 to 12 years. So with that revolution happening, you see initiatives across multiple states, locales that are giving 10-year windows. Hey, in 10 years, we want everything to be electric. So it's happening. They're looking to help you get there. And employers like ourselves are looking to make it happen as well. So I'll step back, but that's kind of a nutshell there.
Awesome. Thanks, guys. So our next trend is, it's actually really exciting. So things that we never really thought possible in terms of mobility or infrastructure are potentially possible now, underway, will be prioritized based on future demand. Because of that, we named this our number 3 trend, active transportation. So I have a couple examples I'm excited about. I mean, living in Boston, I've been able to see some of this firsthand with the recent temporary and permanent protected bike lanes that have been established to encourage people to get out there and explore alternative commuting options without being afraid of the crazy Boston drivers quite as much. So that has always been a challenge, just getting folks to commit to biking in really urban settings. So excited to kind of see that a lot of those things are heading to permanent instead of temporary. The second thought I had is just leveraging technology to guide and encourage behaviors in the moment. So we have a lot of customers and partners that are digging into trip planning further and really just in the moment trip planning. So rather than before you leave the house, it's if you're out and about or specifically in a campus environment where we have a little bit more flexibility on the operating environment, we can much more easily influence a rider or employee or student to select an active transportation mode if the technology is pushing or influencing that in the moment. So for instance, if it takes an Uber ride, 25 minutes, a shuttle ride, 35 minutes, or an 18-minute walk, we want to make sure that we're prioritizing that in the moment to make the option that makes the most sense. So this also helps drive down inefficiencies, that would help free up funding in other areas that are much more needed. So Justin, I know you had some interesting property ideas here. Oh, you're on mute. You win.
Thanks,
You were the
guys.
first one.
Yeah. It's not a Zoom call without one of those moments. Yeah, on the next slide, we talk a little bit. It's combining what we saw on the earlier slide. And I just want to focus in on what's in the center there. We talked about property managers across the country being concerned about teleworkers and what that does to their bottom line. They're also concerned mostly in the urban areas about parking demand. But that middle one is the thing I want to talk about, which is the increased demand for bicycle amenities. 17%, that's the average. It's, as you may recall, 28% in urban areas and more like 9% in suburban areas. This is, we're dealing with properties that are spending thousands of dollars looking at ways to build out sections of their lobby to accommodate more internal secure parking, expecting that predominantly in those urban areas that due to either cuts in transit service or misperceptions about safety of transit during COVID, that a lot more people will feel comfortable using active transportation. And I think to your point, Shawn, with the infrastructure that's being put in place in a lot of cities, I think we're expecting a lot of that to stick moving forward. And that's what these offices are accounting for, is not just a surge due to COVID, but a continued engagement in it thereafter.
Yeah, absolutely. Mel, sorry, where am I? All right, I think we're on to the next slide here. All right, trend number 4. So we all want to be prepared when, in some cases, for the majority that aren't back to work or back to campus yet, when things pick up in 2021, we want to be prepared for our approach to funding. So our number 4 trend is creative funding approaches. And so I think what we mean about that is we're kind of just heading into a different world. So things that we didn't think about before in terms of getting approved on budgets are going to be scrutinized and thought about in a lot of these cases. So even before COVID, both, at least on our end, private to private and public-private partnerships were booming to help subsidize or even get certain programming off the ground. So we're currently working on several new partnerships to bring programs that are maybe on the cusp of elimination from a funding perspective altogether, and making sure that we're finding other like-minded, entities or municipalities that also have a need, and make sure we're connecting those people. So we're seeing kind of a surge in that ask. So yeah, I know we have a couple of creative examples also. Melvin, I think you had an internal one on the corporate side.
Oh yeah. So I mean, we've done, Tesla, everyone's cost crunching, right? I mean, I think across the board would be personally, right? You're saying, hey, I can't spend that much, or, from a, executive level, from an employer level, hey, we rhetorically being employers can't spend that much, right? Whether it be a public setting. I think specifically speaking for Tesla, I think we look and say, hey, what can we do, right? One of the ways we've been able to do it is say, hey, with the shuttles, for instance, with WeDriveU, hey, we've reduced half the seats, right? But we also understand we can't keep the costs up, right? How can we maintain those costs, right? So we work with the WeDriveUs of the world and say, hey, what can we do to both keep ourselves above water, right? What's going to allow those vehicles to run, our people to feel safe, and people to get from point A to point B, right? Looking at electrifying some of the fleet, right? We just talked about a little earlier. Hey, that's a way we can reduce some costs, right? By getting rid of some of that gas and maintenance costs from a shuttle perspective. Looking at it from a couple different other avenues is, what other government entities out there? We just talked about credits that are going to be coming up this year. That's going to be a big one. If you're looking at electrifying a fleet, that's one way of doing it. The other side of the coin is, I would say, merging different options. What does that mean? Shared shuttles was something that I know a couple of employers that do, and they may say, well, I'm kind of afraid of doing a shared shuttle. Maybe the most economical way to do it, considering what's already happening in most private shared shuttles already, which is what? Being COVID compliant. What does that mean? Having the barriers up, having the proper social distancing, right? Allowing those avenues that are really within the safe and health well-being of the employees, make sure that's maintained, having staffing that's out there, CSRs, whatever you need, in order to bridge some of the concern, but then also more importantly, ensure that the adoption's there. And then you're also cutting those costs by not paying for a full shuttle, right? Saying, hey, we can't afford it. We only have, like Shawn talked about it. Hey, I got 9 employees, right? You guys have 900. We just want to help those 9 out, right? So that's a way to say, hey, the typical, I would say, measurement for a lot of folks, they look at is cost per rider, right? How much does it cost per rider to take this mode, right? And they're going to say, well, it costs me $14 a day, $30 a day, depending on where you're coming from, maybe $4 a day, right? And looking at that metric, that really speaks a lot to a lot of stakeholders, right? A lot of the folks in workplace or transportation, they may not know a lot of the lingo that most of the folks in this call may or may not be used to. So how do we get into layman's terms? It's that cost per rider. It's how much it costs to go to work every day. If you take Uber, it costs you this much, right? So understanding where we can mesh those modes, whether it be biking to a van pool, we have this, especially with Tesla. Hey, we'll actually pay to bike to your shuttle, right? To alleviate costs, right? Or bike to your van pool, right? How can we do that? So meshing some of the modes, understanding what's possible, and then doing small rollouts. Did this at Tesla, worked out great. Took some of those innovative approaches, did a little mix and mingle, saw the plus minus of it, rolled it out, did some tweaking, and we're still running and gunning. So these are some avenues of interest of using not only government monies that are there, funding that's available for outfits like the MTCs of the world, the RTCs, different governmental agencies willing and that have the money from the previous year that's pegged and earmarked, right, for initiatives of this nature to alleviate traffic that is coming back in some regions, but more importantly, understanding where the small, large employers or even public and private can then mesh and work together.
Awesome. And Justin, I know you had an interesting example as well.
Yeah, well, I think Shawn, it applies to the 43% of the folks who said they were suburban and the 36% of the folks that said they were exurban. If you folks are like me, 2019 and into 2020, getting something like an e-scooter share system like Spin or any of the Bird, it doesn't matter, to come to your suburban community is pretty challenging. They're all about deploying in large numbers in downtown areas, but understandably they're modeled to distribute and recharge and maintain a fleet outside of that urban core gets expensive. And so we've been working with some business districts outside of the center city areas to try to create ways to bring those scooters out to the suburbs. The challenge is really the charging infrastructure. So if you can bring the hubs out, that's great. When we were talking in 2019 with folks about paying $5, $10, $15,000 for a charging hub, they were like, sure, yeah, that's the cost of me maintaining my property. But when COVID happened, everybody's tightening their belts. Obviously, there's concern about losing revenue. And so they face this challenge. How do we actually pay for this, even though we know our tenants want and need it as a last mile connection to some of the transit systems that are in the area? And companies like Spin have responded creatively to say, look, if you are willing to put a screen, basically an advertising monitor on your charging station, we'll be able to cover the costs of that. And obviously that creates some interesting discussion about what is allowed in terms of advertising, but looking at advertising as a way to offset that cost is a viable solution that we're starting to see to bring that type of micromobility out to the suburbs. So sometimes it's not about what you can take out of your pocket, but how you can negotiate a really creative deal to make it come together.
That's super cool. Yeah, we have a couple examples. We've worked with an advertising agency to wrap some buses that are just white buses that are going, back and forth in an urban environment. And yeah, it helps, subsidize the program on a monthly basis. So I think that's going to be big in 2021 in general, just across, several different modes. But yeah, very cool. Next trend. So we have two more trends for everyone. So we'll try to, I know we're running out of time, but the next one is number 5, our metrics are changing. So our new metric is really how do you get people into the building and when. That's our number 1 metric that, today. So our number 5 trend is performance metrics during COVID and beyond. And I'm actually going to kick it back to Justin.
Yeah, thanks, Shawn. I mean, we talked about this earlier, right? These property managers in office buildings are really concerned about telework, especially in urban areas. And so I think it's a viable one. A lot of people are going to continue to telework. And so the challenge for property managers and for all employers is how do you make the experience of coming to work one that is positive? And that's everything from what do you do when you come to the office? And what we're hearing from architects that are looking at ways to reposition office spaces, it's not about having your own office anymore. And it's not even about having cubicle space anymore. It's about having collaborative space so that you can come together, meet as a team, and then if you need to, go off into a private space to do your work while you wait for your next meeting. But the likelihood is that you are going to only do that 2-3 days a week and likely telework. And so this hybrid model that we haven't been doing a hybrid now. We've been doing all work from home, but we anticipate it enables a hybrid model and using your space differently. But that experience isn't just about how you use the space. It's about the experience coming to and from the building, and that starts from home. And if it's not a positive one, people will just do what we're doing now. And so it's about getting creative. Uber has some new types of Uber pool programs that are exclusively for employees at the same property or the same organization. So it's sort of like a carpool, but you got your own driver. Those are the things we think properties are going to have to really invest in 2021 if they're going to attract people back to the building, something that feels really exclusive and luxurious that makes the experience a little more positive.
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about just the user experience in general. It's very hard to plan for some of these dynamic systems that we're planning on with, schedules are going to be constantly changing and times and regions and things like that. So we're spending a lot of time trying to balance the user experience on some of these like micro transit systems and do we have what's our average wait time and what's our acceptable wait time on certain days, and we have some outliers that are going to be way higher, things like that. So we're spending a lot of time as well trying to figure that as we get the request to do more and more micro transit style and closed on demand systems. So all right, great. Melvin, did you have anything to add on performance metrics?
Yeah, I think one last item too to think about here is, You know, a lot of people want to use historical information, right? This is what it was pre-COVID. No one has real COVID information, right? Let's be honest. The other side too that to think about is there's a lot of return to work plans, a lot of plans. A lot of people are creating booklets and manuals. A lot of them haven't even used it yet. So it's very difficult to create metrics that you don't know or maybe aren't even accustomed to using, right? So I would say be very conscious of when you're looking at metrics, not to use pre-COVID because it's a new normal now, right? In a normal world, we can't, we've been so, I would say, abnormal from the normal way that it's almost you have to create metrics that are going to be within the realm of those that are going to be seeing this information, the stakeholders that you're looking to, enforce narratives and enforce different lays of interest. So, you know, as we talked about some of the different topics here, think about the metrics that are specific to you that matter, and then understand how to get there. So it could be micro mobility, it could be multimodal mobility, it could be probably private partnerships, it could be, there's so many different avenues here. At Tesla, we've done that. We said, hey, you know what? We understand that this may not work right now, so we needed a pivot, and we actually now have COVID metrics, right? We're back, we've been at work for a while, but we've been able to use the ability to create those metrics because of the innovation, because of the way that visually we understood, hey, hold on a second, this isn't working, this is what is working, and now I have to make that narrative in order for it to continue to work. So I would say don't let if you're afraid or you don't know, don't let that hinder or hurt you when it comes to continuing to think outside of the box and continue the narrative that you want if folks are trying to get back to work or you're looking to enroll folks in order for the programs that you're looking, that you know and may succeed, take off well. So I would just say that.
Awesome. Thanks, Melvin. And our sixth and final trend, and this one will be quick, but we have many examples of the community giving back during COVID. So lending talent, resources, and creativity to move people, donations, and more. So with that, our sixth and final trend is TDM community continues giving back. We see this continuing across the ACT community next year and beyond. Our customers had a lot of vital assets and headcount for some time and really leverage them to do a lot of good. So just real quick on the bottom left, we have Silicon Valley Food Bank at Thanksgiving. We had one of our customers kind of coordinate this, and we had our staff helping out. Top right is some wildfire relief in the Pacific Northwest. And then the remaining photos are from our Stuff the Bus campaign, which are in our fifth year. So top left was in Austin last year. We actually convinced one of our drivers to dress up as Santa and got him on a bird scooter and took some fun photos in front of one of our customer sites. And this year we are virtual. So you can check out our website to see virtual donation options across several of the cities that we operate in. And it looks like Melvin is outside. So I think he's got something cool to tell us.
I'm out and about, guys. So we're here. I'm at the Tesla headquarters here in Palo Alto. And you can see it's real sunny. You can see behind me all these Teslas going on, right? This is where we are. And so one of the things that Tesla's done, we historically done is WeDriveU do a Stuff the Bus event, right? Where we say we're going to stuff a bus and bring it. They do it with a bunch of different tech employers, right? In order to provide these toys for the San Francisco Fire Department in the San Francisco Bay Area to provide toys to the local kids. We've done something a little different. We've pivoted. We have another type of program we're doing on the side. And as you can see, there's a vehicle that's right behind me. This is actually a Model X. And this is a Veterans Model X. So we're going to have this vehicle work with the Marines, Toys for Tots. You can see, pretty cool car, right? So what we've done is we've taken this car, we've outfitted it, and we're going to have about maybe 200 toys to display. We've rallied, I'd say, over maybe 250, 300 toys, really at our Bay Area locations. We've rallied, I would say, a good amount. I'd say maybe over $30,000, $40,000, and literally about, I'd say, 5 to 10 days here. And this is just volunteer from our employees. And so that's what we've done, just for this campaign for Christmas during this COVID times. So that's one of the initiatives that we took on. We literally had physical boxes at each one of our sites. I was out there giving them, working with employees in the middle of front lines of production, all the way up to our administrative offices here in Palo Alto. So working with WeDriveU and other outfits of similar nature, it doesn't stop, right? People are in need. The stomach has its own thought, right? It wants to eat. So these kids are out here families are in need, and we're looking to try and support them the best we can with what we can in our capacity here in COVID.
And I'm muted, sorry. So here is our recap slide. So I think, speak for all of us, we'd love to talk to everyone more after this. So our contact info will be up on the last slide. Also, thanks to those who responded to the pre-webinar survey. So most of the input fit into one of these 6 categories. And ACT has the full list to consider for 2021 programming. So thanks again, everyone.
Thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you, Shawn. We're going to get started here and try to get as many questions we can get answered here for the Q&A. Real quickly, just want to remind folks, if you do have a question for our panelists, to please type it in the Q&A box located in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Please also address who the question is for when putting it in as well. Definitely very, very helpful. This first one, I think, could go for you, Justin, or Melvin. I'll start with you, Justin. There has been a lot of research on public transit and that COVID is not a safety factor. How do we best encourage employees to reconsider going back to using transit again?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, knowledge is power. I think ACT has done a tremendous job with its return to work resource guide, and it's something that we use. Obviously, that ultimately went back and influenced some of the national guidance, blanking on the agency for whatever reason right now, that got put out that would lead people to believe it wasn't safe. I think a lot of it is making sure they're clear. Look, combination of the air circulation in these vehicles with the doors opening up, with the frequency that it does, the filter systems that are in there, just the fact that people tend not to be in transit for long enough for the, particulate matter to go into your respiratory system are things people need to understand. I think ACT has done a tremendous job, and it's really upon us in the industry to spread the word about those resources that have already been put together.
Yeah, and I think what this Melvin here, and I think Justin, I think one other element to think about is, I think public transit is safer than it was before. Why? Because there's no one on it. So if there's no one on it, what are we worried about? I think that, along with some of the other normal things that we think about, social distancing, obviously staying clean. We're doing this already. So I think from that perspective, you're seeing frontline workers going to work that are helping people with issues that are using public transit. I think as Justin talked about, knowledge is power. That should be proof positive that it does work, right? So if the people that are looking to help people with issues are using it, or your cashiers of the world, right? The folks that are looking just to keep the liquor store open to serve those folks, or anybody, all of those different things, that should be proof positive. The experiences and the things that are in the world right now that you see, that is direct information. There's no book that will show you what your eyes are seeing. And I think that's key. So if you, like for me, I love taking the bus, to be honest with you. I still bike, take the bus, van pool, I do it all. And I had to go out there and check it. If I was to listen to everybody, I'd be in trouble. So you have to go out and see yourself to actually understand what actually makes sense. And this is how the train of thought, and this is how behavior mindset changes, especially in organizations. You are proof positive, right? You are that identifier. So be that beacon of change, and it can help depending on what area of the US or the world you're in.
Excellent. Thank you both. This next one, I'm going to turn over to you, Justin. I know you were kind of trying to address it earlier, but a study out of Utah reported that there was a gap in the social component, i.e. interacting with coworkers and feeling like a team while teleworking. What do we say to employers/property owners who voice these types of concerns when we try to pitch retaining a telework policy?
Yeah, that's a great question and a great balance that I think we want to strike. I think I saw Courtney Schultz put that in there. Mm-hmm. Obviously what I was describing earlier about creating that dynamic in the office where you can collaborate, I think addresses that human component. The flip side of that is, the telework is doing great things for traffic congestion and parking demand and other things. How do you maintain that? And I think part of it is understanding that productivity is actually pretty high. And we've seen that by the time people get back, it'll be well over a year. I think there's some burnout from the pandemic, but generally speaking, people can see that if they use their time at home for focus time to write or do things that don't require collaboration, that's the value in continuing your telework policy. So that hybrid I was describing, I really think is the way of the future for the workplace. It's not one or the other anymore. It's how do you use them both most effectively.
Excellent. Okay, thank you. This next one, I would actually turn to all of you. I'll start maybe with you, Shawn, and we can go backwards here, let you answer one. What's your vision of new technology in the new mobility world? In parentheses here, TDM for public transit, AV, EV, et cetera. How can we have great and sustainable mobility options?
So I think it's open data, and I think we're well on that path of just, you know, having platforms rather than siloed apps for different things. So I think we have a lot of really good partners out there and technology companies that are well on their way to create these awesome platforms. So yeah, I think what I referenced earlier is just like in the moment trip planning and making sure that we have the ability to get the best option at that moment and the most cost efficient option, things like that. So
okay. Melvin or Justin?
Melvin, you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll chime in real quick. I know,
Okay.
Justin, you're going to close this out, but I think ease of access, availability, and affordability, right? You look at places and people, Justin talked about this, right? There's folks that are buying cars because they literally are scared. There's folks that are able to walk instead of run. There's biking is up, right? So some people are forced into having to make these moves, right? They're saying, hey, this is because of behavior. This is what's happening. Technology across the board is making things easier for folks, right? I can now be able to take like just talk about a spin scooter anywhere, right? In any of the major hubs. But now you're seeing some of these different outfits going to low income neighborhoods and saying, hey, we can provide this through governmental funding, through initiatives to give those folks the same exact access that the haves and the have-nots. So and because of the platforms that Shawn was just talking about, and everyone having a phone or even not having one, being able to have access to one is now making the availability of linear operable modes, right, across the board, easier to access and easier to get into. So technology and data is huge, but then also the accessibility, availability, and the ease. How easy is it for me to adopt this? Is this something I can actually use? And how easy is it for me to enroll? And how can I get pre-wired to know that it works? Uber did a great job, like Lyft, right? They made something that everyone can use, and you can be 55 years old, 9 years old, doesn't matter. And so that's one just, idea that spiraled. And I think that type of thought is going to be paramount to 2021 as we see folks looking to get back into the saddle, whether it be teleworking, hybrid, or what have you.
Yeah, I know we don't have a lot of time. I'll just say, piggybacking on what we've heard so far, I think curated data is key, right? I mean, you can get overwhelmed. I want to know what's relevant to the building I'm in. What are the things that are available around me? All the modes, but curated to that site. I think Transit Screen does a great job of that with their screens. I think there are some apps that do a great job with that. But Melvin, I think you really nailed it. I think leveraging technology for social equity, I think, is really key. And how do you empower people that may not have that kind of technology available to them to have access to it, I think, is the real opportunity and challenge for our industry moving forward. I know ACT's got a great DEI committee that David mentioned earlier. I would hope that those are the kind of things we would talk about there moving forward.
Excellent. Thank you all. I really appreciate your time today. This was a wonderful presentation and a great way to end our webinar series for 2020. I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. I know we've already hit the top of the hour. If we did not get to your question, I do apologize. We do have everyone's contact information up and some resource links available to you all. So please take advantage of that. And of course, the recording will be up in 24 hours so that you can take a look at all this great information again. I want to thank you all and just leave you with that our next webinar for 2021 to start the year off will be Thursday, January 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern Time. Subject line is titled, all about perception, PR, and transportation. So I hope you can join us. Registration will be available later this week. And again, thank you to all of our panelists today. Thank you to WeDriveU for sponsoring. We do appreciate it. And we hope you all have a happy holidays and a wonderful new year. Thank you all.
Thanks, everyone.